Lavender is a gender-critical, radical lesbian feminist living on Bundjalung land of the far north coast of New South Wales. She was born in the bush, Mundajundi country, southwest Queensland, in the last days of World War II. Her Scottish forebears valued education, so that in the late 19th century, her maternal grandmother and her 4 sisters all graduated from Sydney University in the very first years that women were allowed to be enrolled. There being no school bus, Lavender was sent to boarding school in a regional city before her 7th birthday. For secondary school, she went to Sydney, where her feminist headmistress was the daughter of a suffragette and goddaughter of one of the Pankhurst sisters. Her first women's liberation movement event was a rally in London's Trafalgar Square in 1969. She has been a women's liberation and lesbian activist since the 1970s in Armidale, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, and the New South Wales far north coast. Her women's liberation movement work has included organising and speaking at International Women's Days, Reclaim the Nights.Conferences, being the founding mother of Lesbian Network magazine, representing lesbians at United Nations Commission for the Status of Women, supporting Aboriginal land rights, anti-discrimination work, peace, refugees, and the environment. Now, as an octogenarian radical feminist, she has retired from collective and committee work to allow space for younger women and continue to write and speak to protect women's sex-based rights.
Okay, thank you very much. Greetings, sisters from Bundjalung land. And just a little mashup to remind us where we are. So why have I chosen this topic? Well, you know, the capital cities are seen as the hub not only of mainstream but feminist politics and activism. And in regional, rural and remote areas, it's mostly invisible or disregarded by city interests. And so the term away from the city, I've deliberately chosen to highlight that some feminists and lesbians exist and are active in other places besides the cities. There's no competition. We're all there together, but sometimes we get less attention and support. So we need to overcome this political isolation. And so let's make stronger links now between regional and city. So let's start with the advantages of an out-of-city activism approach. So feminist lesbians and lesbian and feminist activists can be a bridge between other women involved in non-specific, not women's rights, but other kind of things like environment or you know, trying to get the road fixed, the local government and so on. And it's often very useful. And also, we do have the chance to get to know other activists. And sometimes, even though the groups are quite small, this is very useful. And networks then develop and can be quite, well, one of my informants told me she thinks we have very deeply formed networks and for the intensity of the regional politics. And an activist may be relatively unknown also because they've mainly been online so that they can avoid some flack because violence and threats from particularly males opposing not just women's interests but environmental things can often be quite a difficult thing to deal with. So there we are in 2021 when that enough marches happened right across Australia. We hung out there in Lismore and I had the Fearless Feminist banner there. So outside the MP's office, we made quite a lot of noise, even in the rain. So the disadvantages or challenges, if you like, of activism away from the city. Now, some of these are directly related to our geographic isolation and the sparse population. But lack of transport is a very real practical thing to get to events and to network with other political women, either local or at distance. And the costs of the transport, or if you've got your own car or sharing, petrol costs. And then there's a time involved going to other towns or locations, could be 2 hours drive, could be an all-day drive. So again, I'm talking about the isolation of geographic, feminist and political, social isolation, age cohort, and cultural interests. So it's something that impinges on our activism. And so the lack of local or regional feminists as individuals and groups is a very real challenge for us. And also just a limited or no sense of what we call women's community quite commonly. And often women's community has got a vast range of women's politics, as you probably all know. But at least that kind of recognition about women having some kind of community, as loose as it may be, is positive. But it's very hard to get that here. So, and probably the Northern Rivers, we've got greater opportunities in a lot of other regions. And it's also like in a city, you can go to the market or the cinema and you'll bump into women you know or feminists you've been in a collective with 20 years ago. No, we don't have those opportunities for bumping into people so much. So that's a problem. And a lot of us, I've talked with about six or seven other feminist activists around this issue just recently. And the missing of a face-to-face connection, you know, that's a really important thing. Sitting down for coffee, we read each other's non-verbal communication and the support. So we really miss that. I mean, digital's one thing, but this is an aspect we miss. And also the lack of or very few women's services like women's health and women's refuges and so on. I mean, around here in the Northern Rivers, we do have these, but they're mostly stuck in Lismore, which is sort of one part. And yeah, and it may take women quite a long time to get there. So the third section I've got is about some women's community services that do exist or events that happen. They're a bit nervous about feminists attending because they don't want the organisation to be seen as feminist, you know, i.e. undesirable. So also there's few or no public events like International Women's Day, Reclaim the Night. I mean, we're lucky actually because, yeah, we do have some here in the Northern Rivers, but you only have to go to Tenterfield or Inverell and it's just not happening. And sometimes women come all the way, you know, 5-6 hours drive when they hear that we're having events here. It's a hell of a long way. So the other thing about out and active lesbians who are seen as weird or threatening in the general community, but also in groups. And whereas less threatening, closeted and non-activist lesbians who may be known as lesbians, I probably use the word queer, but you know, those of us who are activists are seen as being threats and weird as well. And I don't mind being weird, frankly, but some people do. So the common presumptions that lesbians are part of the LGBTI queer sphere is a problem. Now, I just want to talk a little bit about the cultural environment. Having a social science, sociology background, I can't help myself. But I kind of look at the broadly three levels, starting with the deeply conservative people that are around in the general community, resistant to change. You know, they don't want to see all the terrible greenies protesting about CSG or logging. And there's a bit of an overlap here because, you know, the hated greenies. And so a bit like, well, women who are seen as feminists and radical feminists are kind of hated too, like these labels are used. Now there's the more moderate people who sort of have more moderate ideas about community and change, but some change is accepted, but they want it to be local and local specific, suspicious of outside, influences, unless of course it's good for business. And with the floods that we've had up here, there's been that tension there about people coming into the community to help. Oh, it's all right, but you can go now. We've had enough of you. And so that includes some women who have been in organisations. So then not so keen on changes in long-held community values. And then, of course, we've got, you know, the radicals, the progressive idealists, and of course, we've originally the hippies and Save the Forest and all that from the 70s. And now there's a lot of new age influence and various ones. And look, some of them I agree with their politics, but there's a few wackies around, like the sovereign citizens. So it's good, though, to hear and see questioning of both public and private values and practices and aspirations, but sometimes the solutions they suggest are pretty way out. So another part about the cultural environment is, look, some of the things we're going to say also happen in the city. So I'm not saying that particular to us, but have a very negative bearing when there's so little support and visibility around here. So, or patchy. So reliance on digital communications and social media. So that's a positive thing in many ways, to be able to keep in touch and exchange news and strategies and so on, but it can also be problematic, and I'll mention some of that later. So the widespread ignorance of what feminism is. I mean, you know, it's often based on what's presumed to be feminist. They see a woman standing up and speaking about against a road closure, and they presume that she's feminist just because she's feisty. Well, you know, it doesn't always go. And the also thing about the proliferation of negative stereotypes. And I just had to tell you this one. There was a woman mayor, well over 15 years ago, but she was supported by a lot of feminists and progressive people. But she went on the public record as saying, someone asked her, well, what's it like being a woman who's prominent, you know, in community? She said, oh, well, you know, wouldn't want to be a feminist. People think feminists are all hairy-legged lesbians. I was absolutely outraged and rang her up and spoke to her. She said, oh, I was just quoting what the general feeling is. I said, oh, thanks very much for perpetuating it. So the idea also that lesbians are either butch and femme, I mean, you still hear this stuff around. Right, so what have we got? Oh, systemic lesbophobia, homophobia, sexism. Also, you know, all these things, racism, able-bodyism and ageism, they're absolutely systemic. And, you know, this is a problem that we face everywhere. We need more support, though. It's very hard to deal with because we're seen as just individuals when we speak up, a lot of us feminist activists. But examples here with when we have community crises and events like the floods or an anti-gas sit-in or something, people go, oh, look, those feminists, they're so aggressive, and those aggressive lesbians. And, you know, blokes are pretty aggressive too. And, you know, and women who don't even look like feminists can be fairly assertive. And of course, a lot of people don't know the difference between assertive and aggressive. And I've just put in this little stereotype here about women football players, regardless of their sexual orientation. Presume they're lesbians if they've got short hair. So a lot of them are sort of, even though they're not lesbians, like the Matildas, are lesbians. So there we go at a CSG rally. Yes, next one, please. You don't need to see much of me. Gender critical politics away from the city. Yeah, I know that. I keep on saying this. I know that these issues do arise in the cities, but are magnified for us. There's very painful and difficult splits amongst feminists and lesbian feminists in the community, friendship groups, and even personal relationships over the whole thing of gender identity and gender critical political activism. And I know of quite a few lesbian couples who've really done it hard over that, and some of them ending up parting because they just couldn't cope with the whole issue, both the ideas and the practices. And of course, I'm just going to call them queer, LGBTIQ plus groups. Of course, they're rusted onto gender ideology and have been known to expel or be very unwelcoming to gender critical feminist lesbians. And there's terrible denigrating gossip that emanates from these groups, not just their Facebook pages, but, you know, at their once a year dance and so on. We've got a very big prominent GLBTI social group here that has New Year's Eve dances and so on. And, you know, it's like the field of fallen lesbians who thought they could go there and not have to talk politics and just get on with having good fun. And it's been too difficult. So basically, you know, gender critical feminist lesbians have very few allies. And sometimes people say they agree with us about our politics and wanting women-only space, but they are dingoes. They don't want, they're fearful of being seen as supporting gender critical. So less supported women's issues. So I just run through the little list because, you know, sex-based women's rights, women-only services and space, lesbian rights, lesbian mothers' rights, women and children with a disability, and lesbians or anyone who opposes sexist speech and practices. And actually a couple of blokes do from time to time, and they're told they're wusses. So, you know, aging and ageism and aged care, they're not very popular issues and hardly get any support. And those of us who want to be called lesbian rather than queer or gay or cis and all that rubbish, it's very unpopular. Right, so we're getting on to our challenges now. Men speaking or marching at Reclaim the Night and International Women's Day. Gay men that think being gay makes them a feminist, for God's sake. I think a challenge is any man who says they're a feminist is a challenge. Women supporting men claiming any of those above. Women publicly criticising individual feminists and feminist organisations, and I can tell you it goes on a lot. And women want to dissociate themselves often too. Women with little or no feminist involvement, denigrating feminists and lesbians, even their friends, and especially about gender critical. So other challenges, male privilege, well, it's everywhere, isn't it? Oh, a great one was when I was at the Women's Health Centre a couple of months ago. So the male partner of the staff member, who wasn't actually in the building, just wandered in, past the reception area, into the staff and treatment areas. And not one of the women challenged him. And I said something to the reception, because I was a visitor, I'm no longer involved. I used to be on the management committee. I said, oh, I didn't know you allowed men in here. And they go, oh, it's all right, we know him. So, you know, that male privilege stuff. So the conflation of sexual orientation and gender identity, yeah, we know about that, but you know, it is a real challenge to try and get people to understand these are two different things. And in fact, gender identity is a load of old cods. And so gender identity politics and its mindless acceptance by the general public, LGBTI groups and services, public and community organisations, whether they're providing a service or sporting or so on, you know, it is very difficult to deal with. And I have to add, bloody pronouns, they're a challenge. We've got to stand up to them. So challenges, more or less things for us to do. We'll have a bit more of our to-do list in a minute. Forming alliances with non-political lesbians and straight feminists, really important. Even though we see a lot of differences, personal differences, it's really important for us to try and do this. And sometimes it's quite difficult too, because of the stereotypical idea that, you know, feminists are a no-no. So dealing with social media and online groups' hostility to gender critical ideas, there's been a lot of fallouts. Now, I don't do social media, so I only hear about it. But the ideas and the individuals who are denigrated, there's very little support. I mean, that can happen with media, social media, etc., anywhere, because, you know, there's not necessarily a geographical barrier, but it is a big challenge. Now, I'd like to think one of our challenges moving forward is to find and support young and emerging activist women, many who are critical of sexism and the patriarchy, not necessarily talking about gender critical stuff, but you see them out there, IWD sometimes, and often talking very much about personal experiences, but hey, we know the person's political, but they're reluctant to be seen or identify as feminists. And I think this is very much a widespread phenomenon these days. So somehow we've got to clean up the image, have we? I don't know, clean up their ideas. And just have to put this in that it's very relevant around here, but not exclusively, that the presumption that green and environmental politics are feminist or at least pro-women, well, hello, we've seen some terrible things happen from So there's the IWD lunch that I organised at Lennox Head some years ago, and had a good cross section of women. Had an intergenerational, 3 different speakers, aged 30, 39, 52, and 80. Next one, please. So changes we want. I'm thinking general community. Of course, these are general again. Respect and space for feminist voices. I mean, this has been told to me by quite a few women I've discussed this issue with. And respect and support for women-only spaces. Greater understanding and support for sex-based women's rights, because when you just say women only, they don't always get it. Recognition that not all lesbians want to be part of the LGBTIQ+, or that those organisations, and often spokesmen of them, speak for all of us lesbians. It's that terrible presumption. Right. What do we want to see from feminists and lesbians, others in our camp, so to speak? Well, we want that support, whether it's in our public roles or personal lives. And as appropriate and agreed, we need to be careful we don't presume what others want, of course. And we want to see critics of gender critical activists and activism challenged publicly if possible. As I say, it's like the thing about whether someone's a feminist or not. People will come up and say to you privately, oh yeah, I'm on your side, or I know what you're talking about. But come on, speak up, have the guts. We're not acting just for ourselves individually. So another thing, of course, this goes with a lot of activism, look after our own personal health and well-being and try to minimise stress and avoid becoming worn out. It's a big one. It happens. And also something we want to see is upskilling and supporting individual feminists and lesbians in their abilities and strategies for calling out gender ideologies and as appropriate, skills like public speaking and digital and written communications. So, yeah, we want more work and contact with young lesbians and young feminist women. They're out there, and somehow we need to find those links. Develop also ways of educating women in general society about, I've said that before, haven't I? Gender critical reality. Upskilling women to promote, and I'm sorry about the repetition, social media, webinars. These are kind of things we need to assist each other with. Thanks, Janet, for your skills. And support for dealing with the negativities of gaslighting and denigrating gossip and so on, and the conflicts that happen about gender critical politics. And well, we'd like city-based feminists to reach out and support and include us personally and politically. A long-standing friend of mine, I think 48 years I've known her, I was talking with recently, lives in the city, and I said, oh, I really want us to keep in touch a bit more. And she said, oh, I'm much too busy, I'm sorry, but I've got bushwalking and I've got book group and so on. I go, okay, right, I've been a has-been, haven't I? So that's a little message, how we can empower each other. Thank you. Thank you very much. That's all now.
Thank you very much, Lavender. That was really thought-provoking, and I relate to it as a woman who lives in the regions. So yeah, thank you very much. I look forward to discussing it further.